This is the Domain Magnet Show, where you'll learn everything you need to know about buying, optimizing, and selling online businesses with your host, Michael Beroslavsky.
Hello, Blake.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining. So where are you calling from?
We are in Melbourne, Australia.
Nice. So we last spoke about 10 months ago. Then you first became the CEO of Flippa. And I really loved that you are reaching out to some of the top sellers and kind of discussing some challenges to see how to improve things. So I'd love to know how it's been so far. What's it been like running Flippa? And what was your focus for the first year?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be on the podcast. First and foremost, it's an absolute privilege to run a business like Flippa. We've got a huge community and we've obviously got huge responsibilities to that community. We know how much they want to use Flippa and they want a good experience. I guess joining Flippa, we discovered that there was, some historical changes that have been made to the way that Flippa was operating, which had made it a little bit difficult for buyers and sellers to connect. Specifically buyers who wanted to find the right thing at the right time. And then as it relates to sellers, the way in which they were able to communicate and then drive viewership and ultimately bids and offers for their particular listing. And so we've been working hard to understand how Flippa's historically worked and what people liked, and also to understand how Flippa should work in the future to make that experience better. And so what that means is we've tried some things. Some of those things have worked really, really well. And we've tried some things and some of those things have worked terribly. And that's the nature of working in a marketplace of this size. We've got over 600,000 community members. We get over 21,000 new community members, be it buyers or sellers, each month. And so not everyone is going to love the changes we make, but we are doing them, at least we think, for the right reasons. And it's about how quickly we can recover demand for all of those super sellers, premium sellers, and just people who use the platform regularly. We want to create a nice experience. So look, it's been challenging, definitely. But to some extent, I think we've done a good job with a few things. So we've done a good job with enabling buyers to create profiles and then matching them up with the right businesses. And to some extent, I think we've done some things really poorly. We've played around with the link hierarchy and the way in which things surface to the top. And the product team has done their very best to try and, reinvigorate what we've seen historically as good demand and good volume for any given listing. And essentially we're sort of going back to the future, if you like, where we're working on a lot of things. You may have seen the new homepage actually went live a couple of days ago. And so the link hierarchy has been improved. It's more similar to what people may have seen through 2016. There was a big change in 2017 and 2018. And so here in 2019, we're kind of going back to the future to some extent. So hopefully that gives people some sense of what we've been working on.
Nice. Sounds like you've been quite busy. And could you give us a quick picture of where is Flippa right now in terms of number of employees or revenue, sales, or some other numbers that you are focusing on?
Yeah. So employee-wise, we have 27 staff. And the 27 staff are located around the world. So we have the vast majority of our staff between North America and Australia. But we also have individuals in Manila in the Philippines, both engineering and some customer support. We also have some staff working out of a European office who are there to service the growing European demand that we have in the buyer and seller community. So from an employee standpoint, we're growing. We're actually looking to hire some support staff, customer success, and sales. Sales is kind of defined as two ways, both the kind of education of buyers and sellers as they come on the platform, but also account management. So those people who will help our buyers and sellers find something, negotiate, understand what is right and wrong about a particular business opportunity. And we're hiring for those people in Texas. So mostly Austin, Texas, but we have some room for remote headcount also in Dallas and Houston as well. So a little bit of recruitment going on across North America, which we think is really critical. It's still the biggest portion of marketplace demand for Flippa. As it relates to sales, we've seen really, really good growth in kind of the higher value listings on the platform. And that's not something, we've seen some comments out in the community where people say, oh, Flippa's clearly only orientating itself to high quality businesses or big businesses or businesses versus starter sites and domains. In reality, that's actually how Flippa has been for some time, literally 5 years. The vast majority of revenue has been derived from higher value listings. So call it $10,000 plus listings. So that's actually the reality of Flippa. And so it's actually not that we've said we're going to ignore domainers. It's not that we've said we're going to ignore starter site operators. It's just that that's the way Flippa has orientated. And so we've therefore, by nature of the revenue, orientated some of our product management and product development efforts around that community, because you often go where the opportunity is, and the marketplace has shown us that that's actually what the opportunity is. So there's a little bit of effort there, but I should say that's not to say at all that Flippa is ignoring a big, large, historical community of domain owners, buyers, starter site owners and buyers. In fact, the new website, the new homepage is very clear evidence of how much emphasis we're putting on all channels within the marketplace. And so Flippa is actually growing, and it's growing in particular across the areas that we just talked about before, the plus 10K e-commerce websites, content and advertising sites, which are either backed by affiliate revenue, AdSense, Amazon Associates accounts, and any other revenue streams within the content dynamic. We're also seeing growth in the number of SaaS businesses, software as a service businesses, and marketplace businesses listing on the platform. And so we're in growth mode. We're seeing about 4,000 new listings come on board each month.
Nice. So I'm curious to dig a little bit more into numbers. You mentioned 27 staff, and we know that, so one of your biggest competitors is probably Empire Flippers, and they have, I believe, about 60 people right now, and FE Enterprises are also a little bit bigger. So does that mean that you are currently probably behind them in terms of sales as well, or how would you compare that?
Yeah, we, as a private company, we don't reveal revenues, but I would be very surprised if Flippa was behind those brokers. I think the clear thing is that we don't consider them competitors. They're brokers, and brokers are fantastic. We see 4,000 listings a month. We see 4,500 new verified registered buyers each month. We see 21,000 community members join each month. We're a marketplace. We're a technology platform which provides a way for a buyer to connect with a seller at speed and at scale. And that's very different to the way a broker operates. And so they're always going to be heavier on human resource, because the nature of running that type of business requires a very specific skill set. It's a broker skill set. And we're big fans of brokers. We have 30 brokers operating on our platform. We have fantastic relationships with our brokers, and they are a huge reason why Flippa is what Flippa is today. And so we don't need to hire lots of brokers to manage our community because we have brokers who manage our community. We have account managers who manage our community. And we have this network of buyers who are running the process themselves, who are quite sophisticated and skilled. What I'll admit is we need to do lots of work around education. So helping sellers understand how to value their business, helping sellers understand the sales process, and similarly, helping buyers understand how to go through the due diligence process, how to negotiate in a constructive and polite manner, which is really important. And then ultimately, how to transfer assets once you've got to the conclusion or the pointy end of a deal. So I can't speak to how big Empire Flippers or FE International are. I'm sure they run great businesses. I'm sure they are having success. I hope they're having success. But quite categorically, we just don't see them as competition. We're a marketplace. We're heavily dependent on discussions, watches, comments, bids, and offers. And so we think about our business from a marketplace dynamic standpoint, and they think about their business from a clearance standpoint. So they'll only ever accept businesses that they know they can sell because they've got X number of brokers who can deal with X number of leads. In a Flippa context, a technology company which has a 10-year-old, very, very well architected platform, we can deal at scale. And so that's the most important thing from our perspective.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. So I have quite a few short questions for you that we received from our followers. So in terms of the buyer's perspective, one of the biggest complaints that we've seen, and I can tell from our perspective, we've been selling and buying on Flippa even before it was Flippa. Back then it was SitePoint. And we have, I think, about $500,000 in sales now. So I can tell you that I'm quite experienced with both sides of that.
Yeah.
And in terms of the buyer perspective, one of the biggest complaints among beginner buyers, people who are first-time buyers or second-time buyers, it's generally that they feel a little overwhelmed. They see too many listings. They are not sure, it looks risky. They're not sure how to choose. So what is your recommendation for them, and how are you kind of improving their experience in that?
It's a great question. We hear that a lot. And firstly, it is overwhelming. I completely accept that it's overwhelming. Marketplaces where you've got so much supply side demand are often a little bit overwhelming, and it does come down to some really, really good quality search functionality to be able to find what is right. And then once you've found what is right, it comes down to really, really good data availability to verify that listing. And so the first thing is we empathize, and so we're putting in some efforts around that very, very quickly. The second thing is some recommendations. So first and foremost, use Flippa's search functionality and filter down to a level where you get a constrained set of results. And so you can do that for websites, obviously. You can do it for apps, and you can do it for domains. Now, if you're searching for a website, the key thing is to use the filters as it relates to business model, e-commerce, SaaS, marketplace, advertising and content. The second thing is to use the most active filter on the top right-hand side of search. Most active will give you some sense of where other buyers are spending their time. And if other buyers are spending their time there, then you've almost got some level of verification playing out. Other people have gone through the process of asking questions in the comments section, mounting discussions, watching the listing, and waiting for updates. And so that gives you some sense, like in any marketplace, of where the good quality where the good quality resides. So that's the first thing. Second thing is ask the right questions and discover the data which will give you some sense of whether it's a really good quality listing or not. Now, I know that's hard, and we're putting in some measures. So we'll talk about the measures in a moment. But the big questions to ask are obviously, can you give me some sense of, and it does differ by business model, can you give me some sense of your average order value for e-commerce? How many unit sales do you make per month? How many unit sales in the year? What percentage of sales are through paid marketing? What percentage of sales are coming organically? So that would be for e-commerce. If it's SaaS, it's a little bit different. What is your annual recurring revenue? What is your churn? What is your lifetime value? How many paying customers do you have? And how long have they been retained for? Essentially relates to ARR, which is annual recurring revenue. So each was a bit different. And so we ask buyers to learn the art of asking the right questions. Now we have a responsibility there. So there's a couple of things. One, we're going to connect to more and more data sources. So we currently connect to GA, so Google Analytics. We also connect for certain sellers who use QuickBooks online. We also connect to QuickBooks. And so that gives buyers instant access to their financial data at the cloud accounting software level, which is fantastic. And we're going to be connecting to all of the different platforms. So the Shopifys, the BigCommerces, the Wix, the Squarespace, the WooCommerce, etc. And we're going to be providing access to dashboards direct out of the software itself. In addition to that, we're going to be putting in place some scoring so that businesses that have certain elements to their listing get scored higher and therefore are shown preferentially. You won't be able to pay for that preferential treatment. You'll have to show that by way of data. And so there's some of the things we're doing. But in short, I completely understand the frustration. It is hard. There's lots on the marketplace, and it does come down to showing a little bit of discernment and curiosity to try and find what is a really great website, business, app or domain to acquire.
Yeah, that sounds great. It seems like you are putting in a lot of effort to make it better for the buyers. And what are your thoughts about vetting? Do you do some vetting now, or do you plan to do more of it in order to help with first-time buyers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we will soon be bringing in place a verified by Flippa badge. Now, interestingly, we will architect how that plays out. And critically, it doesn't necessarily mean that something that isn't verified by Flippa isn't good quality, because the key question is scale. And when you've got 4,000 listings of different price points, Flippa's never, unlike a broker, we're never going to eyeball every single piece of data for every given listing. It's just not humanly possible. That's exactly the same as Airbnb not eyeballing every apartment or home. It's exactly the same as Upwork or Freelancer or TaskRabbit eyeballing all of their community members. It's just not possible when you operate at scale. And that's the fundamental difference between being a platform and marketplace and being a broker. They're very different things. So what we will do, though, is we will put in place a 25-point check. And so the 25-point check will basically enable us to, on a listing, get a subset of listings which pass that 25-point check. And we will then eyeball each one of those. We will then verify the data attached to those, and we will put a verified by Flippa stamp on those listings. Now, critically, that won't be every listing, and critically, it also doesn't mean that great listings are still not available. Of course, they're available. We're not going to be able to verify everything, but that's one of the things we have in our plan.
So it sounds like you are planning to have some algorithmic solutions that would pick a few of the listings that seem more interesting, probably based on revenue and other factors and age. And then, you would have your staff go over them manually. And do you have some ideas what kind of listings that would be, or what percentage of listings would potentially become verified?
Yeah, great question. I don't have a sense of what percentage. I think that will play out as we start to I guess, perfect the algorithm. As it relates to the type of listing, it will be the listings which provide access. So it won't be starter sites, because they typically don't have revenue, and revenue is a key component of a verified online business, digital asset and or website. So that's a really critical distinction. So we will be verifying websites and online businesses that are post-revenue. In addition to that, we'll be verifying websites which provide access to their GA, their Google Analytic data. And in addition to that, we'll be verifying businesses which have some age to them. And so I don't know the answer to that yet. We haven't thought far enough along that process, whether it be a 1-year-old business, a 2-year-old business, a 3-year-old business, or a 5-year-old business. I'm not sure the answer, but essentially the businesses that we will and websites that we'll be verifying will be those that have characteristics that we believe therefore require a little higher touch, and that's where we'll be orientating our efforts.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. So we've talked a little bit about the buyer's perspective, and now kind of moving on to the sellers. One of the biggest issues that sellers have is because there are so many listings now, it's difficult to get enough attention and attract enough buyers to your listing. So do you have some suggestions for more experienced sellers how to sell it better, besides of course the basics like adding a lot of details and a lot of integration and adding Google Analytics? How can people get more attention and sell faster?
Yep, good question. I think there's a couple of things. The first one is most website owners don't do a great job of articulating what it is about their website which is actually special. So someone will say, my website reviews fish tanks. Now, that's not helpful, and buyers don't gravitate to listings which are not accurate and not detail orientated. The more information, the more likely that buyers watch and comment and start a discussion. Now, the way the Flippa algorithm works is the more watches, the more discussions, the more messages, the more comments, the more bids and offers, the more likely other buyers come, because that's what we consider to be our marketplace dynamics. That is exactly the data which ensures that your listing finds its hands into more buyers. Now, the only way it will find its hands into more buyers is if you have an accurate listing which completely and accurately articulates what it is that somebody is acquiring. So it's not my business reviews fish tanks. It is my 6-year-old AdSense powered online magazine or blog reviews fish tanks, has reviewed over 200 fish tanks, and delivers revenue by way of an Amazon affiliate account. Now, I just made that up. I'm not suggesting that's a perfect description, but the point being, that's the type of insight and detail that a buyer expects. Now, if you have that, a buyer will comment. They'll ask a question. A buyer will watch. And the minute you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the list starts to grow, Flippa's just going to work. Flippa's algorithm will start to surface you up to as many people as possible, because we believe in that listing. The marketplace has told us to believe in that listing. That's piece one. Second piece is Flippa is interested in promoting the listings which we think are priced well and reasonably. And there are so many sellers on the Flippa marketplace which exaggerate their value. And exaggerating your value won't get you any buyer interest. And from a marketing perspective, the marketing team at Flippa isn't interested in promoting websites that exaggerate their value. Why? Because Flippa is a success fee driven business. So ultimately, we want to sell the good things because the bad things don't sell. And so the marketing team will look at businesses which are priced well based on their traffic and their revenue. And revenue orientates to profit, And then price point or asking price orientates to a net profit multiple. And so for businesses that are priced reasonably, and that's different for each business model, but if we see anything priced at a 7, 10, 12, 50 times net profit multiple, our marketing team quite simply will not look at it. I'm being very, very honest, very transparent, but there's two things that play out at Flippa. One is marketplace dynamics and one is merchandising. And the people who benefit from marketplace dynamics have fantastic listings. The people who benefit from our marketing efforts are priced reasonably.
Yeah, that's a good tip about making your listing look special. I've definitely found that if you are able to stand out, you'll generally get a lot more interest. It's going to be much faster to sell. I think that's great advice. And in terms of current trends, I'm curious, what are you seeing as some emerging trends, or some potential things that there is higher interest among buyers right now, but maybe not enough demand from the sellers? So what would it be, some of those opportunities for experienced sellers to get into?
Yeah, great question. So at the moment, we're seeing a lot of demand for Amazon affiliate businesses. So not fulfilled by Amazon. There's certainly a trend there, but Amazon affiliate businesses. So the businesses which are reviewing product and making their money by way of affiliate revenue. So lots of demand for those businesses. Lots of demand for niche businesses. So businesses which have a very good community orientating around a topic, a product, or a theme which isn't hugely competitive. So there's large numbers of online fashion businesses. They're not particularly interesting because they're so easy to acquire. Lots of them sell, but it's also a competitive space. And so from a seller's perspective, if you're selling one of those businesses, you really need to shine through. You really need to stand out in the crowd. Whereas businesses that are operating on a niche basis, so we had a finance blog that was delivering AdSense revenue, and it sold within 48 hours for $33,000. We had a business called ThankBot, and ThankBot's really cool. So ThankBot basically, you upload a CSV of records or type in a note, and then they will send out a handwritten note. So you upload digital notes, they then send out handwritten notes. And that business sold very, very quickly because it was considered a niche proposition. It was considered not to play around with lots of competitors, and it was considered something which was very easy to grow on the basis of its existing traction. So niche interest type sites are super interesting from a business model standpoint. Amazon affiliate and AdSense, AdSense is still hot. Amazon affiliate is growing. E-commerce is particularly good around subscription commerce right now, which is really interesting to see. And of course, there is a extraordinary amount of demand for SaaS businesses still, for obvious reasons. Recurring revenue is everyone's dream.
So to sum it up, make your listing special, include a lot of data, focus on Amazon affiliate or simple business models, and price it to sell. Is that right?
Yeah, price it to sell. And it doesn't mean that you won't get an amazing price, but the best thing to happen to a Flippa user, a Flippa seller, is competitiveness. So what you want is buyers wanting your listing. Now, the minute you overprice it, people don't even come in. But the number of times we see businesses that sell 10, 20, up to 50% greater than their asking price is huge. That happens regularly. But it only happens if you set a reasonable price to begin with. The best thing you can have is more than one person who wants to buy your business. The worst thing you can have is no one.
So on that subject of price, do you have some data in terms of average revenue multiples or profit multiples, for example, for Amazon affiliate sites or SaaS businesses from what has been sold on a platform recently?
Yeah, great question. I might actually pull that data, Michael, and I'll send it across to you, and perhaps you can distribute it to the community. I must admit, I just don't have it at my fingertips, but certainly SaaS businesses we are seeing sell upwards of 3 times net profit multiple. E-commerce businesses we never see them sell above 3.5 times, and more typically we see them sell between 2.1 and 2.5. As it relates to AdSense businesses, I must admit I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head. So I'm going to send you that data if that's possible, and you can distribute it to the community.
Yeah, sounds good. And we've talked about some current trends, and what do you see as some future trends, maybe a few years down the line? How do you expect this to change, or do you think it's going to be the same and affiliate and AdSense sites will still be the most popular ones?
Yeah, it's a great question. Not necessarily. I mean, I think that we are still at the beginning of this asset class. And what I mean by that is the standard small business today looks very different to what it did 10 years ago, obviously. And so Flippa was founded 10 years ago, and there were very few websites available to buy at that time. And now the standard or at least the changing face of small business is digital and online. So I don't think it will be what we are seeing today. I think it will be entirely different. I think SaaS is a very interesting one because I think that SaaS businesses are so rare because it's so early in the SaaS life cycle. And so I think for many years to come, and probably the sweet spot really will be in probably 3 to 5 years, when there will be more and more SaaS businesses on the market who have realized true value and are now looking to exit. But at the moment, most of them are scale-ups. And so they're not ready to sell. And so all the buyers want them, but all the sellers aren't ready to relinquish them. And so I think that you'll see more SaaS, obviously, over the next 3 to 5 years. But to answer the question, I think that new business models in the online sector are surprising us every day, right? And so subscription commerce was one of those. Clearly, marketplaces there's lots of them, but they're still a relatively immature sector. SaaS businesses, as we mentioned, I think that Amazon affiliate is here to stay for obvious reasons. And so there's more and more people coming online who are very, very good marketers, promoting niche topics and driving Amazon affiliate revenue. So I think that will stay for some time to come. But I think the most exciting thing is we'll probably see some emerging business models shine through.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that the attractiveness of SaaS businesses is that they have practically unlimited potential. You might end up buying something that could become the next Airbnb. And that's not going to happen with an affiliate business, because you might buy an Amazon affiliate website and maybe you'll be able to grow it a little bit further. Like maybe you can get 50% more revenue, like 2x more revenue. But with a SaaS business, it's potentially so scalable. So that probably attracts a lot of people.
Yeah, one of the really interesting things there is some people don't realize that they should be a SaaS business. That's the most amazing thing to me. So there are some really good businesses on Flippa that are not SaaS businesses. So they're not listed as SaaS businesses, but they should be. And so that's an interesting art. Can you find a business that has traction, that is paying a one-time fee for an unlimited license, or has a community activated against a particular interest or niche that you can turn into a SaaS business? There's an example on the site right now. I'm not sure whether I'm being particularly fair to the seller because it's a great business, but he charges a one-time fee. Well, actually, it's free to use for 99% of the community, and then he charges a one-time fee for a perpetual license in perpetuity. That should be a SaaS business. He should be charging a monthly recurring rate for access to his software and technology. And so think about that. I encourage your community to think about, are there any businesses out there that they could acquire and turn into SaaS businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very interesting angle to consider. So let us move on to some other things. First of all, domaining. Flippa has entered domaining, I believe, about 5 or 7 years ago. So it was not originally part of a marketplace. And I'm curious, first of all, how big is domaining for Flippa? Is it something like 10% of your total sales? So I understand you probably cannot give us a number, but just to give us an idea of how big this is and how much focus is Flippa giving that.
Yeah, I'm just having a look right now. So it looks like, well, it's about 7.5%. So 7.5% of total transaction value is domaining, which means it's small compared to the rest of the marketplace.
But you've sold quite a few really expensive and ultra premium domains before. I think you've even had one domain sale for about $1 million. Is that right?
Yes. So I think that there will always be a place for really, really high quality domains in the macro environment to sell for large amounts. But what we are seeing is less and less high quality domains up for sale each month or quarter. And I think that's probably for a few reasons. One, I think that you can now acquire domains in any given category, .travel, .food, .whatever. And that's probably opened up a market for an alternative beginning for a business. In addition to that, categorically, we are not the biggest domain environment in the world. And so it quite simply could be that Flippa's domain community is finding their way onto other platforms and trading on those other platforms. Now, we completely respect the domain community and we will have that avenue. And if buyers and sellers can connect there and use the marketplace constructively, we absolutely encourage that. But the reality is, given it represents 7.5% of the business per my lookup just then, it's clearly not where the vast majority of the community is orientating their time and efforts.
Yeah, it looks like you have quite a few good domain names listed on Flippa. And I think there are some potential really good deals for buyers because it seems that you would have a lot more sellers than buyers in the domaining space compared to websites and online businesses.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what type of domains have you seen to sell better on Flippa? In general, or compared to, for example, other marketplaces like Xero or GoDaddy?
Yeah.
So what would be your suggestion for domainers? What kind of domains should they prioritize to list on Flippa?
Yep. I think there's a couple of things. So primarily Flippa is a North American audience. So that's the first thing to consider, which means we've primarily got a North American buyer base. And so clearly those domains which orientate to a North American trader or business owner are going to sell better than those that don't. So that's probably the first thing. I think the second thing is I don't think we're probably any different to a Xero or GoDaddy in the sense that it really does come down to the usability of the domain. And so if the domain isn't considered usable, then it's less likely to get any demand or half decent value. I'm the first to say I am not an expert in the domain space at all. That's not my core competency. We do, however, have some members of the team who are experts. So I'm happy to take the question on notice and come back and we can then distribute that information back to your community. But I think you're right in the sense that there are clearly still some really, really good opportunities for domainers to make good amounts of money. And there's some really, really great demand for high quality domains. Now, what does that mean? So the first thing to say is that one of our colleagues here at Flippa can basically provide a high-end matching service for good quality domains. And so if anyone would like further detail on that, they can send a note to support@flippa.com or just address me directly if you like, blake@flippa.com, and I will connect those individuals with my colleague. And in short, what she does is she ensures that it gets premium placement on the marketplace should she deem it to be a high quality domain which needs to find itself into the hands of the right buyers. So that's probably the tip I've got. Send us an email, let us know that you've got a high quality domain, and we'll make sure it's in the hands of the right people.
And I know that Flippa acquired a domaining company a few years ago. I know it was a private transaction, so you probably cannot disclose much details. But if you can share some information about that, why did you decide to do that? How did it go? Are you looking to acquire more domaining companies, or is that not an option anymore?
Yeah, I think that Flippa has realised that the strength of its operation is the marketplace, less so brokerage. And so Flippa did acquire a business called Domain Holdings, and that was a domain brokerage. And Flippa has since divested of that brokerage. And so I wasn't here. I can only imagine that, like any acquisition, it's designed to add incremental value. And so if the business is divested of it, I can only imagine that it didn't add incremental value. But I'm speaking out of turn to some extent. I've been the CEO now for 10 months, and that acquisition took place many years ago. So that would be my hypothesis.
That makes sense. And moving on to some other topics, I'm curious about what Flippa is doing right now for promotion and marketing in order to attract more buyers and more sellers, and what was most effective among your marketing channels.
Yeah, great question. The first thing to state is that Flippa's demand does come from word of mouth mostly. And so Flippa is blessed by a very, very high net promoter score. Sellers and buyers who sell and buyers who buy have a very good experience. And so, yeah, occasionally you'll see someone comment about a scam. The reality is there are very few people who get scammed. They just happen to shout the loudest. In fact, there's been one example of a fraudulent transaction in the last 6 months. So our marketing is benefited by extraordinary word of mouth, huge amounts of positivity around the marketplace experience, and the fact that we are the speediest path to sell, and we have the largest buyer community in the world. And so with that, we get really strong word of mouth. So Flippa doesn't spend aggressively from a marketing channels standpoint. In fact, I would challenge anyone to find any example of Flippa spending money to go and acquire customers. So most of that comes organically. What works for us, however, are different lead channels. So certainly valuing a business is considered to be super valuable. People want to understand the value of their business. And so our valuation calculator is the single best way to get on the radar at Flippa. It's also the single best way to get a quick valuation on your website. Critically, that's not a perfect valuation. It's algorithmic, and there's lots of things which go into a valuation of a website. Size of the community, age of the site, age of the domain, current financial performance, traffic base, marketing channels, whether they are paying for most or whether the vast majority of it is organically generated. That's not a perfect valuation, but that's our single biggest lead funnel. So since February, we've had over 4,000 people come through the valuation calculator, which is significant. That's our single best performing marketing channel.
Yeah, that sounds good. And you mentioned briefly the speed. I'm curious if you can share some details about what's the average time that a website is listed on the marketplace, or average kind of time to sale.
Yep.
For example, just for some most popular categories. So for example, websites under $10,000 or maybe between $10,000 and $100,000 for like an Amazon affiliate site.
Yep, of course. So there's two ways to list on Flippa. You can either list by auction, and that's obviously time-based, or you can list via fixed price, in which case you've got a minimum asking price, but it's not a fixed time period. And so it's quite split in that regard. And so first comment is that across the board, it's 2.84 months. So call it 3 months on average to sell a website. Now, if you sell at auction, and most of the time auctions are less than $50,000. There are some anomalies, but most of the time auctions are less than $50,000. If you're going to sell, you will sell between 30 to 45 days on average. Most auctions run for 30, and then there's often a post-auction negotiation in the event that there's no winning bidder. And so a lot of auctions actually sell post-auction. That's a really important thing from a seller's perspective. An auction can be used to drive demand. At that point, the best thing to do is negotiate with those people who have demonstrated some interest. Categories. Again, I might have to take the question on notice and give you a sales cycle length for each category that you can distribute to the community. I don't have that at my fingertips. I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect. So you mentioned 2.8 months and about 30 to 45 days. So that does sound reasonably fast.
Yeah, that's quick, right? I mean, a lot of sellers say, "Sell my business fast." It comes down to the quality, one, and two, we're probably, I don't know this categorically, but we're probably the quickest path to sale globally. I can't imagine that anyone is moving businesses as fast as us or websites as fast as us. And that's because we've got the largest buyer pool. So you've got demand.
That sounds good. And one of the biggest issues with Flippa a few years ago for the sellers was that there was a very large number of non-paying buyers. So you would often have someone winning the auction or, placing a big winning offer and then just not following through. I know that you've implemented quite a few KYC methods and, and other verifications, but does that still happen? Is that still an issue? And, if you can share some numbers, for example, or is that not relevant at all these days?
No, it's relevant. Yes, it happens, but it always was a very, very small percentage. I think that's the important thing. Now, remember, the web is a very vocal environment. And so a small few can yell very loud. Flippa's non-paying buyer market was always under 1.5% of transactions. That's very small, but it happened. So I accept that it happened, and we have invested lots of effort around this. It's not perfect yet. So there's a few things. The first thing is a KYC check. So basically what happens is when a buyer goes to buy something, we basically put them through a KYC check, a know your customer check. So there's ID verification there. We do ask the same for sellers, actually, but buyers are obviously relate to your specific question. The second thing is really that sellers do need to take responsibility. I know that sounds harsh, but they need to take responsibility for speaking to buyers during the sales process. We will see occasionally a seller say, great, someone just put in a bid for $15,000. They'll close the auction, accept that price. They've never heard anything from that particular buyer other than the fact that that person dropped the number 15000 into the keypad. That's not a buyer you want to sell to. So what we encourage people to do is if you receive an offer that you are comfortable with, don't close your auction and accept it. Start to get into a dialogue with that buyer. Because while Flippa accepts that we have a lot of work to do around ensuring that every buyer is verified, we accept that responsibility and we will take that on. But in the meantime, we ask our sellers to make sure that they're not selling to someone that they've never had a conversation with. You're unlikely to buy a car, you're unlikely to stay in an Airbnb, and you're unlikely to buy a house from the person that you have had absolutely zero correspondence with. It's highly unlikely. Airbnb, you chat with them before you get there. Buying a car, you'll typically meet them before you go for a test drive. And buying a house, you typically walk through the house and you meet a real estate agent who gives you some level of comfort. We simply ask that people go through that process on Flippa and ask the buyer to show some evidence of their interest and have a discussion, be it over email, on the discussion forum, or of course, via the phone.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. You know, I find it's interesting that you mentioned Airbnb. I find it really strange that you can go and book a house without exchanging any messages with the host. It just feels weird. Yeah. I always send a message before, booking something. And
it's probably a little bit different for them though, isn't it? Because the actual experience is staying in the home versus with a business or website. You need to understand how it's being operated and whether the person has the means to afford it. And buying a $5,000 website, buying a $500,000 website, buying a $5 million website is often very different to spending $50, $100, $200 a night on some accommodation. The amount of money at stake is often higher on Flippa than it is traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we sell on Flippa, we always make sure to engage in some dialogue with the potential buyers early on. We send them some message, to check a little bit, ask them what we are doing, what's their experience with this kind of business, to see, if they have the qualifications. I think it's very important to have some really good and clear communication.
Yeah, that's right.
Way. And finally, on a more personal note, so I've listened to some of your previous interviews, and you have quite an extensive history of running different companies. So I'm curious, what are some things, some habits, routines that you found to be very effective at operating as CEO and running a company? What are some things that you apply for increasing that operational efficiency?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. It's a great question. Not necessarily a question I expected. Well, thank you. It's been really interesting seeing different industries, and it's been really interesting working with some fantastic leaders in different organizations. And so I learned a lot through those processes. But for me, to some extent, it comes down to asking myself every morning, what is the single biggest thing I can do to drive impact? And so I try to stay disciplined around achieving that one thing each day. And so that can mean that lots of things go unanswered, and it can also mean that you don't get to everything. But in a business which has very, very significant growth ambitions, We see ourselves as empowering business owners all over the world to be able to exit, be it someone who has a very small starter site all the way up to someone who has a $5 million business. We want them to have the opportunity to exit. And so that's where we orientate our impact focus. What do we do right now to assist more people to be able to exit? And so that can mean at an engineering level. It can mean let's improve onboarding for our buyers and sellers so that we can connect the two of them. From a recruiting standpoint, it can mean hiring people who understand how to sell or how to operate or have lived within a small business ecosystem, because they're the people who will understand what our customers want. And so each day I wake up, it's about what is the single biggest thing I can drive impact for? And after that is very much customer orientation. So I always start my day responding to any customer queries before I do anything that is internally focused. And so I've done that everywhere. In all the organizations I've worked in, I start my day focusing on the customer and know that they come first, and then I orientate internally after that. Probably the second biggest tip is to limit prioritization to very few things, which is the nature of prioritization. But people will actually say, well, this is my priority, this is my priority, this is my priority. There'll be lots of things that they need to work on. In our case, right now, it's very much about listings engagement. So that's the number one priority at Flippa, listings engagement. So your questions before were pertinent. And so I think that anyone in any organization, be it small or big, should think about the number one priority and only work on tactical level delivery, which can influence that priority. And so that's how I tend to orientate my time and also the way I manage.
Yeah, that's a great question to ask yourself as a leader of organization. What can I do today to bring the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think it's simple, but often we get confused and conflicted around all of the things that we've got to achieve.
Well, thank you for sharing some thoughts and details. So how can our listeners contact you, and any final thoughts or any final kind of piece of advice for sellers and buyers, and why should people prefer Flippa over other options to sell their business?
Yeah, great question. Look, I think that there's some really fantastic brokers out there, so we respect that community. From our perspective, we don't think that there is a better place to sell from a speed, efficiency, and demand standpoint. And so if you're looking to understand demand, there's no better place than Flippa, because we have the greatest buyer pool in the world. We're seeing 4,500 new verified buyers join every single month, and that's growing. So from a seller's perspective, we see ourselves as the one and only real marketplace. It's one thing to call yourself a marketplace. It's another thing to be one. So that's a key point. People can get in touch with me very simply. So Blake, BLAKE @flippa.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, very easy to find. Blake Hutchison, HUTCHISON. There's no N in the middle, which most people always mess up. I'm at Twitter at Blake Now, BLAKENOW. But as I said, Blake @flippa.com, and I'd love to hear from any and all of your listeners.
Thank you, Blake, and looking forward to see how Flippa develops in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for having me on your show today.
Domain Magnet is a leader in buying and selling online businesses with a proven track record of expertise gained from over 300 deals since 2004. To learn more about how we can help you acquire or exit a profitable online business today, head over to domainmagnet.com for more details.